everyone, it's midnight sharp and you're watching World News Program with me, Miriam Zian. To the headlines. Zionist forces escalate assault on Jenin, demolish homes and impose curfew as OCHA warns of health collapse or health system collapse in West Bank, and UN confirms 12 Palestinian deaths in the West Bank. Also coming up, UN warns of insufficient resources to sustain aid levels and highlights displacement in Gaza, while Algeria urges for global action to save Gaza's children. And Putin and Trump signal readiness for talks to end Ukraine war and address energy issues. Hello again and welcome to the details. First, in our news file, 2 Palestinians were killed on Friday evening when a Zionist drone targeted a vehicle in Qabatiyya, south of Jenin. The Palestinian news agency reported that the drone strike hit a vehicle in the Jabal al-Damouni area near the medical center in Qabatiyya. Following the attack, Israeli forces raided the town and began sweeping operations around the targeted site. The same sources added that intense clashes erupted between Palestinian citizens and Israeli forces, who detained several young men and conducted on-site interrogations. And in a related development, Palestinian media reported that Israeli bulldozers were demolishing homes in various parts of the Jenin refugee camp. In earlier statements, Jenin Deputy Governor Mansour Saadi warned of an impending large-scale Zionist military operation targeting the central areas of the Jenin refugee camp in the northern occupied West Bank. And on Thursday evening, Israeli forces imposed the curfew on the Jenin refugee camp, heavily deploying throughout the area. Local Palestinian sources reported that Israeli forces destroyed infrastructure at the entrance of the town of El Yamoun, west of Jenin, and set fire to homes and vehicles. This occurred amid heavy drone activity in Jenin skies and continuous gunfire, marking the 4th consecutive day of the Israeli assault on the city and its refugee camp. And on Friday, an elderly man was shot in the thigh by Israeli forces in the Jenin refugee camp. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society stated that its teams transported the man in his 60s to the hospital after he was wounded. Zionist forces have continued their assault on the city and camp for the 4th day, resulting in the martyrdom of 12 Palestinians, the injury and detention of dozens, and extensive destruction of infrastructure and private property. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs warned of deteriorating healthcare services across the West Bank due to Israeli-imposed restrictions on the movement of Palestinians by closing roads and village entrances. In a Friday statement, OCHA reported that 68% of healthcare centers in the occupied West Bank could not operate for more than a week, while hospitals were functioning at only 70% of their total capacity.
OCHA reports that the Jenin Government Hospital remains disconnected from water and electricity, and access is extremely difficult due to road damage. The facility is relying on dwindling water reserves from emergency tanks installed just weeks ago through an allocation by the Occupied Palestinian Territory Humanitarian Fund, which is managed by OCHA.
The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights spokesperson Saif al-Khitam stated that the agency had confirmed the killing of at least 12 Palestinians and the wounding of 40 others by Israeli forces since last Tuesday. In a press conference in Geneva on Friday, he called for accountability for all those responsible for what he described as unlawful killings. He also criticized the Israeli escalation in the West Bank, noting that more than 3,000 families have been displaced from the Jenin refugee camp.
We are also concerned by repeated comments from some Israeli officials about plans to expand settlements further still and a fresh breach of international law. We recall again that the transfer by Israel of its own civilian population into territories it occupies also amounts to a war crime. The High Commissioner calls on Israeli authorities to cease all settlement expansion and instead evacuate all settlements as soon as possible, as required by international law. What's happening today in the West Bank may have an impact on the ceasefire in Gaza. It is imperative that the ceasefire in Gaza holds. It is also imperative for Israel to cease all settlement activities and not to transfer its own population, civilian population, to territories it occupies.
The spokesperson for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights expressed concern over the Israeli statements and plans to expand settlements in the West Bank, describing it as a new violation of international law.
Our office has verified that at least 12 Palestinians have been killed and 40 injured by Israeli security forces since Tuesday, most of them reportedly unarmed. Among the injured were a doctor and 2 nurses, according to the Palestinian Red Crescent. All killings in a law enforcement context must be thoroughly and independently investigated, and those responsible for unlawful killings must be held to account.
The Arab Parliament condemned the crimes and violations committed by Israeli forces and settlers in the West Bank, particularly the aggression against the city of Jenin and its refugee camp. In a statement on Friday, the Speaker of the Arab Parliament held the Zionist government responsible for this escalation, warning that it threatens to ignite security and humanitarian crises and undermine all efforts aimed at peace, ceasefire, and ending the war. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reported that 653 aid trucks entered Gaza within the past 24 hours. OCHA added in its statement that the aid shipments and humanitarian workers are reaching areas that were previously difficult to access. The UN Humanitarian Coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territories, Min Hadi, emphasized the need for additional funding in Gaza to achieve the objectives of the ceasefire. In a Friday statement, Hadi warned that funding shortages could affect the UN's ability to maintain aid flows at targeted levels throughout the ceasefire period in Gaza.
Definitely, we need more funding. We need to buy tents. We need to buy other humanitarian aid. There is a lot that needs to be done, and we really need to start, as I said many times, early recovery. We saw people already. UNDP started opening roads, doing rubble removal, and many more activities are still to start. But funding, yes, we need immediate funding for the entire UN system.
The United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East reported that 1.9 million people in Gaza are homeless, predicting that reconstruction will take years following the mass destruction committed by Israeli authorities. In a statement on Friday, UNRWA stated that at least 1.9 million people have been displaced in Gaza due to the war, with many forced to live in temporary shelters, such as those in the Mawasi area, the southwestern Gaza Strip.
We express our concern over the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, particularly in the northern parts of the Strip, especially since 1.9 million people in Gaza are homeless. Most homes have either been completely destroyed or have become uninhabitable. As for rebuilding infrastructure, restoring normal life and addressing trauma in the region, it will take years. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are living under the rubble, left by months of intense Israeli bombardment.
And as the ceasefire holds in Gaza, the toll on its youngest residents remains devastating, with schools in ruins and over 1 million children in desperate need of psychological support. Their future hangs in the balance. Usama Ayadi has more.
As the ceasefire in Gaza holds, the aftermath of the ongoing conflict continues to impact the region's youngest residents. According to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, approximately 660,000 children in Gaza remain out of school, despite hopes for a return to normalcy following the ceasefire.
An estimated 150,000 pregnant women and new mothers are in desperate need of health services. Children have lost their schools and their education. Those with chronic illnesses have struggled to access the care they need, many unable to do so.
The agency highlights the severe disruption to education caused by the violence and the massive destructions that affected the educational buildings in the whole region. These dire conditions left thousands of children without access to school for an extended period, with a total ambiguity over what could the next days bring.
Children have been killed, starved, and frozen to death. They have been maimed, orphaned, separated from their family. Conservative estimates indicate that over 17,000 children are without their families in Gaza. Some died before their first breath, perishing with their mothers in childbirth.
The United Nations also raised concerns about the mental and emotional impact of the war on Gaza's children. Alarming reports state that around 1 million children in Gaza are in desperate need for psychological and social support, as they have witnessed and experienced the horrors of the Zionist genocidal war. These children are struggling with trauma, loss, and a lack of stability, creating a growing crisis in an already devastated healthcare system.
Many have faced sexual violence. Girls who've endured the additional indignity of no menstrual care have been left exposed and vulnerable. 1 million children are in need of mental health and psychosocial support for depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts, according to UNICEF.
With schools still closed and many facilities damaged or repurposed for emergency relief, the future of Gaza's children remains uncertain. As international organizations work to provide aid, the situation for young Palestinians is dire, with calls for long-term solutions to support both their educational and mental well-being. The UN continues to urge for increased efforts to ensure that children in Gaza could resume their studies and receive the necessary care to heal the psychological scars of the war.
Algeria, which chaired the session, called on the international community to take urgent action to save the children of Gaza, victims of the aggression the territory endured for 15 months. Algeria's permanent representative to the UN, Ammar bin Jama, emphasized during the session the need for the world to recognize the suffering of Gaza's children, who have witnessed horrors that no child should ever endure, as he described it.
It is crucial to voice the suffering of Palestinian children who still endure the consequences of the deadly attacks on the civil population carried out by the Israeli occupying power for more than 15 months, 470 days. Attacks leading to astonishing figures. Thousands of injuring children, among which the highest number of child amputees in modern history.
The Algerian representative also highlighted the crucial role of UNRWA during this unprecedented humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
UNRWA, the backbone of humanitarian action in Gaza, is vital, especially in the fields of healthcare and education. The agency is indispensable. The agency is irreplaceable. Attacking UNRWA in this critical period ruin reconstruction efforts and threaten the very presence of Palestinians in their land.
The Al-Qassam brigades, the military wing of Hamas, broadcast the first part of what they called the Death Trap series, showcasing their fighters' engagements with Israeli forces in Beit Hanun, northern Gaza, during the war of extermination. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun stated on Friday that Arab unity is the foundation for addressing current challenges. He added that after forming a government in Lebanon, communication with the Gulf states would be initiated to establish new foundations for cooperation. During his meeting with a Kuwaiti delegation led by Foreign Minister Abdullah Al-Yahya, the presidential palace in Ba'bada, Beirut, Aoun mentioned that these new cooperation foundations were outlined in his inaugural address, which laid the principles for state building. And in other news, the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, stated that lifting European sanctions on Syria is contingent on steps taken by the caretaker government in Damascus. In an interview with Anadolu agency, Kallas stressed the need for a shared understanding among international and regional stakeholders regarding Syria. She noted that the issue of sanctions on Syria will be discussed by EU foreign ministers at their meeting on January 27.
I'm hoping for having a political agreement how we go forward. So, of course, we have very different sanctions. We know from Syria's side how this, what they want to see. I mean, what is needed in order for them to build up the country, relief of some sanctions before the others. But what is also important for Europe is that this is not for free. I mean, we clearly see and want to see a development on their side, that it goes to the right direction. And so we are, ready to do four-step approach.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán told state radio that Hungary wants the European Union to persuade Ukraine to resume gas transit from Russia to Europe as the EU seeks to extend its sanctions against Russia next week. Orbán stated that the EU sanctions against Russia have caused financial damages to Hungary amounting to 19 billion euros. EU foreign ministers are set to meet on Monday to decide on extending the sanctions.
A legfontosabb dolog, hogy most ugye itt van napirenden a szankciók meghosszabbításának a kérdése.
The Russian Ministry of Defense announced that its air defense has destroyed 121 Ukrainian drones in various regions across the country. In a statement, the ministry confirmed that 123 drones were intercepted and destroyed in different areas of Russia. Meanwhile, the governor of Ryazan province, Pavel Malkov stated that the wreckage of a drone fell from a private home, causing a fire without any injuries. Separately, the spokesperson for the Russian Federal Aviation Authority announced on Telegram that temporary restrictions were imposed on operations at Domodedovo and Sukovsky Airport to ensure flight safety. Russian Security Council Deputy Chairman Dmitry Medvedev stated on Friday that approximately 450,000 Russians signed contracts for military service in 2024, adding that the goal is for a similar number to join in 2025. During a meeting on Friday, Medvedev noted that more than 40,000 individuals also joined volunteer brigades and went to fight in Ukraine in 2024.
The contract for the military service amounted to about 450,000 people. In addition, more than 40,000 of our citizens joined volunteer formations and are in the military operation zone. I would like to sincerely thank everyone who stood up to defend the fatherland in the most difficult conditions during this very difficult time, on the front line for the mutual assistance and true brotherhood in the face of trials.
The Kremlin said on Friday that the war in Ukraine is tied to Russia's national security and not to oil prices, in response to U.S. President Donald Trump's call to lower oil prices. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov emphasized that for Russia, the issue in Ukraine concerns national security and the threats facing Russians living there, as he described.
The conflict in Ukraine is not dependent on oil prices. This conflict is due to the threat to Russians who live in the known territories and the complete refusal of Americans and Europeans to listen to Russia's concerns. This is not related to oil prices.
Russian President Vladimir Putin expressed his readiness to hold talks with U.S. President Donald Trump on issues such as the war in Ukraine and energy prices, noting that it would be good for the two leaders to meet. In a televised statement on Friday, Putin described Trump as intelligent and pragmatic. He also remarked that he does not expect the U.S. president to take decisions on sanctions against Russia that could harm the U.S. economy itself.
Firstly, I want to say that Russia has never refused to have contacts with the U.S. administration, and it's not our fault that the previous administration refused these contacts. Indeed, it would be better for us to meet, based on the realities of today, to talk calmly on all those areas that are of interest to both the United States and Russia. We are ready. But I repeat, this primarily, of course, depends on the decision and choices of the current American administration.
U.S. President Donald Trump stated that he is ready to meet with Putin as soon as possible to end what he called, quote, silly war, unquote. In a press statement, Trump emphasized the need to stop the Ukrainian war due to the high casualties among soldiers.
From what I hear, Putin would like to see me, and we'll meet as soon as we can. I'd meet immediately. Every day we don't meet, soldiers are being killed on a battlefield. And that battlefield is like no battlefield since World War II. That's it. And I have pictures that you don't want to see. Soldiers are being killed on a daily basis at numbers that we haven't seen in decades.
President Donald Trump also ordered the declassification of U.S. government files related to the assassinations of former President John F. Kennedy in 1963, his brother Robert F. Kennedy in 1968, and civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. in the same year. According to media sources, the order includes the release of thousands of classified government documents related to Kennedy's assassination. The executive order signed by Trump also aims to declassify remaining federal records concerning the assassination of Senator Robert F. Kennedy and Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.
Big one, huh?
And China reiterated its willingness to begin dialogue with U.S. President Donald Trump to resolve outstanding trade issues between Beijing and Washington. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning stated that the scope of shared interests between her country and the U.S. is vast, which calls for enhanced dialogue and partnership to benefit both nations and the global economy at large.
We have stated our position on this issue many times. China-US economic and trade cooperation is mutually beneficial and a win-win situation. We believe that if there are differences and frictions between the two sides, they should be resolved through dialogue and negotiations. There are no winners in trade wars and tariff wars. It's not in the interests of either side, nor good for the world.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, we wrap up tonight's program. From me and the rest of the team, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.